you came to a training that was advertised as motivational interviewing. What do you already know about motivational interviewing? Someone raise your hand and call it out. It works with people who are ambivalent, meaning they feel two ways about changing. Part of them wants to, part of them doesn't. That's right. Yes?
It was research that I understand was based with substance-addicted adults initially, and
right.
It was about how to get people from a state of how to put language to clients walking through a process of change that's self-generated, and where there may be relapse issues, or how to overcome people capturing a desire to change and moving into a change cycle. So
okay, come on up here. I'm going to trade places with you. You feel you know this stuff better than I do. Fantastic. I'm serious. You already know a lot. So this was a method that's an empirically based method, meaning that this has been tested and there's a good body of evidence to indicate that this method is effective, that it actually facilitates change faster than standard counseling techniques and faster than no counseling. Okay? And it's tested primarily with substance abuse and addiction, but it's now being applied to all kinds of behavioral health problems, such as victims of domestic violence, offenders of domestic violence, child welfare involved parents who are uncertain about their parenting, whether they want to change that or not, incarcerated persons on probation and parole. It's been applied with people who have difficulty dieting or being medically adherent with whatever medical condition they have. Any kind of condition where it involves someone making a change in the way they act, it's been used with those populations. So it has some general applicability. It does not work particularly well with young children. So it's not a young children method per se. It's basically adolescents and up. Okay? Works really well with adolescents. I know a lot of you work with adolescents. Works really well with adolescents, and you'll see why. I've listened to probably over 100 audio tapes of counselors and clients in all kinds of situations. And the one thing I can tell you, regardless of training, how much or how little, that I hear in almost every audio tape is I hear the therapist being 3 steps ahead, at least, of where the client's at, as opposed to stepping back and being a little more patient. Usually it's because the therapist is concerned and they want to help the client. It comes from a very good place, but it sort of ends up not being a good match and not being the best use of the time together. So being where the client's at is something we're going to take a look at today. All right, next slide, please. So the definition. What's interesting about the definition is motivational interviewing at heart is a client-centered method. Okay, so it means that the client's values, the client's priorities, the client's feelings, the client's goals for him or herself are the center point of it. Okay? Not your goals and not your agency's goals. This gets tricky. And I know because when I worked at the Trauma Recovery Center, we had a goal. We need to get these clients for follow-up medical care. That's being measured. We're being measured how many of our clients go back to follow-up medical care. We're being measured how many clients we get on this benefit program, the victim of crime program. So it put tremendous pressure on the staff to make these things happen fast. But it also messed up the relationship that was happening because the therapist would end up interpreting the goals and rushing. So what's important to understand is it's client-centered. They're in charge of the pace, but it's also directive. It's an interesting merger of opposites. And I will show you later today how you can be client-centered but also be strategically directive in a way that the client doesn't necessarily experience as directive, which is the best way to be directive. Okay? Also, it works from within. Everybody has intrinsic motivation for something. Something motivates everybody. Your job is to discover what that is for the client in front of you and how to connect that to some of the problems they're having for them, or help. Actually, you're not connecting it for them, you're helping them to make that connection themselves. I'll give you an example. I worked with a homeless guy who was I'm not trying to traumatize you, but he was stabbed out here in the Tenderloin, sleeping in a doorway. He smelled to high heaven. He'd been homeless for 10 years. He was absolutely psychotic, delusional, barely intelligible. And you know what? When the SSI check came in the bank account, he knew what day, he was at the bank at 8:55, and he knew how to get his money out. He knew, I'm not saying that he had the same organizational and motivational capacities that you have or that I have, but I'm saying, like, he can do something. And I discovered him doing something, and I realized for him that check is a motivator. So it needs to be, it's easy for us to see what doesn't motivate people, because that's the source of our frustration sometimes. But what does motivate them, and what are the values that underlie that motivation? So for him, it was about going to a movie, which he really valued, getting some food, getting a temporary hotel room for a week or two. And the safety that came with that is what he valued, okay? And so those were the things that, if linked properly, would motivate him to engage with me on a more permanent plan. And then you mentioned ambivalence. This method assumes that we are all ambivalent. I'm going to ask you in just a few minutes to identify a change, a very small change that you've recently made. I can guarantee you, most of you went back and forth for a long period of time. Do I really want to do this? I don't think I need to do this. Maybe I should do this. Well, so-and-so wants me to do this. I'm sick of them telling me what to do. I mean, this is the thing that goes on in people's heads before they make a change. There's a back and forth. This process acknowledges that back and forth and acknowledges that that's a normal part of the change process. Next slide. When is the right time? When is the right time? You know, I had some personal goals around getting back to a fitness regimen that were important to me, but you know what? In the last year, I've adopted a kid. I have a parent with a serious illness. This is not the right time in my life to be working out. I mean, come on. I mean, I've got to deal with these other things that take priority. So clients are the same way. They have other things that are more important to them. It's not that they don't want to change. It's that maybe the timing. There's something to just luck and timing with change that sometimes counselors fail to appreciate. Yes. What makes a therapeutic stance? And this stuff is really important. And what motivational interviewing are methods to accomplish some of these things. Methods to show interest in the person's experience. Methods to look. What is the underlying intention or meaning here? Looking beyond the obvious. Choosing compassion over judgment. Offering kindness, expressing support, encouraging hope. These are variables that are all associated with this method. Next slide. All right, now it's your turn. I want you in your head to think of a very small change that you've made recently. Nothing that would be embarrassing. You know, the big step, you don't have to write that down. If it's too embarrassing, you can just think it. So you don't want anyone to be, people be reading on your sheet. So, people are nosy, and counselors are really nosy. So we're nosy people. Admit it. I am really nosy. I have an inquiring mind. So be discreet. But I want you to mostly think of a small change. You guys are laughing at yourselves. And I want you to think about this. How did you come to decide this change was important in your life? How did you go from not thinking about it at all, to thinking about it a little, to thinking about it a lot, to actually doing something? How did you move from no thought to some thought to more thought to change behavior? Who, during this time, did you talk to, if anyone? And you may have talked, a lot of people change without telling anyone. Okay? If you talk to someone, though, I want to know what that was like for you. And did that enhance your ability to change, or did it block it? Okay? And I'll give you an example. Someone in the last class I taught talked about switching from a PC to a Mac. And he talked about this whole year-long, it's a small change, not that personal. He talked about his whole process about that, what it was like to go to the Mac store, what it was like to have his wife telling him, get a mat, get a mat, get a mat, I want a mat, get a mat. You know, and just so it can be something really simple like that. So I'm going to give you just 3 minutes, okay? And I want you to either think it or, and if you want to write it down, you can always cover it up. And I'm going to ask for a few of you to share, but I won't, you can always pass, all right? So 3 minutes thinking about and answering some of these questions. Thank you. What is your name?
I'm Carmen.
Okay.
I recently I finished up my schooling in 2005, but was still using my student ID to get into museums and get various discounts around the city and around the world. So I turned 30 last month, and I decided that, in fact, 4 years prior to leaving school, I was actually not going to use my student ID to get a discount anymore. So this is actually a decision that, for me, I didn't necessarily go through a long decision-making process, but I think it's representative of some of those sort of like intuitive things that come and like you need to make the change, or I needed to make the change, and so I thought, you know, my life hasn't always been marked by like impeccable honesty. So I thought, you know, in moving into a place of hoping to adopt like a lifestyle of perhaps more integrity, I decided that I would make some really small, like really tangible changes. And one of those was duct taping my student ID to the inside of my journal so that in fact I would not use it to obtain discounts where they actually weren't warranted.
We got to clap for that one. You're hilarious. But you know, the event that got you thinking about it, you've been thinking about it, but when you turned 30, you did, I'm guessing, I'm just going to put words in your mouth, you did a life review, which a lot of people do on a big birthday, and you're like, okay, the next decade I want to be a little different in this way.
Yeah.
And this was a symbolic step.
Yeah.
Of a way you wanted to be different in the next phase of your life. And I'm guessing you felt a little guilty. She's laughing. You felt a little guilty. Can you switch the slide for me? Which is this part. Most people change after some kind of uncomfortable discrepancy, which usually has like, I don't really like that I'm doing that anymore. So, like, behavior that you've done suddenly has a consequence of you feeling not so good about yourself or feeling like there's something out of whack with your values and intentions and your behavior. Okay? So the corollary is when I'm busting out of my pants and my belt is like all the way up and I think I'm a healthy person in terms of like my fitness and my eating, and it's sort of incontrovertible evidence that I have not been exercising and I've been binge eating for 8 months. Do you know what I mean? It's an uncomfortable discrepancy because it makes me realize I'm really not that person that I wanted to be. Like I keep thinking I am, but I'm not. And here's the evidence. Because these are dry clean pants. So they didn't shrink. I always be like in my chinos, I'd be like, oh, that dryer. So, but you know, so reminding that change is a natural process that happens all the time. And it usually, not always, but it usually follows an uncomfortable discrepancy where these little pieces of information hit you and they're a little embarrassing. It's that discrepancy. Who I want to be and who I am, they're not linking up, and it's becoming clearer to me in the way that people are reacting to me. Okay? One more person. Thank you. Let me say a few things. What you did is actually fairly uncommon and very common. You did radical change.